Good morning students. Today I am going to discuss about a very important topic, hypoxia and its types. So before going into types of hypoxia, first let us define what is hypoxia. So most of them we consider hypoxia means decreased oxygen or decreased partial pressure of oxygen. Yes, it is one of the cause, but main thing is hypoxia is decreased oxygen delivery to tissues. So hypoxia is the tissues will not be getting enough oxygen. That is called hypoxia. So based upon the causes, we are going to divide the types of hypoxia. So before going to the causes, what causes this tissue decreased oxygen intake? Let us see. So we have already put a video on transport of oxygen. So if you watch that also, it will be useful to link this. Anyway, we will again repeat just a quick session. So we all know the barometric pressure at sea level. So at the atmospheric pressure is 760 millimeter mercury or 1 atmosphere. Out of the 760 millimeter mercury, we all know that 20% is oxygen, which comes to around 159 millimeter mercury. So this is partial pressure of oxygen at sea level. So this comes inside this, and the partial pressure of oxygen in alveoli. So this is alveoli. So the partial pressure of oxygen at atmosphere is outside. So the outside oxygen pressure is 159 millimeter mercury or 160. The alveolar pressure is 104. So this is normal. And because of the partial pressure difference, the oxygen from here enters into the alveoli. From here, the gas exchange takes place, the capillary, and we can see the oxygen is transported, and finally enters into the tissue. And from here, the exchange takes place because here the PO2 which will be coming is 40. So the exchange takes place, and here it is 95. So the PO2 of arterial blood, this is arterial blood, and this is tissue PO2 which will be 40, because tissues are going to take oxygen, so the partial pressure of oxygen will be decreased. So this is the transport of oxygen, the main idea. So based upon this, so listen here, if there is decrease in barometric pressure, so the first step, so the barometric pressure is decreased, or otherwise the atmosphere pressure which is 760, instead of that, imagine it is becoming 600. So what will happen to this partial pressure of oxygen? 20% of the 60, which will be around 120 millimeter mercury. So what happens to this? Instead of 159, it becomes 120. Are you able to understand? So whenever the barometric pressure is decreased, the partial pressure of oxygen which is entering into the alveoli is decreased. So the first step itself is gone. This is the first step. Exchange occurring is the second step. Transport is the third step. Tissue taking is the fourth step. So here the partial pressure is decreased. In this condition, the partial pressure is decreased. The partial pressure of oxygen is decreased, which causes hypoxia. Hypoxia type number 1, hypoxic hypoxia or hypoxemic hypoxia, both are same. The cause is decreased partial pressure of oxygen. One of the reason is decreased barometric pressure. I will write it here. So decreased partial pressure of oxygen causes. So what causes decrease? One is decreased barometric pressure. Now you can pause the video and try to answer. Which causes decrease in barometric pressure? Normally 760. Which causes decreased barometric pressure? Yeah, correct. So one is high altitude. So as I go higher, what happens? The oxygen level decreases. Even though this 20% remains same, when this becomes 760 to 600 or 400, obviously 159 will be decreased, 120 or 110 or 100, depending upon whatever is barometric pressure. So high altitude, note it down. So as I go on higher and higher, there is hypoxia, which is called hypoxic hypoxia. So I am discussing about hypoxia or hypoxemic hypoxia. The cause is decrease in partial pressure of oxygen. One of the causes decrease in barometric pressure. High altitude is one of the cause. Then closed space, note it down. So closed space, for example, imagine you are caught in a house which is full of fire. So you are not able to go out because the house is in fire and you are just trying to avoid the fire, but you are not going to escape. The doors are all fire. Now in this situation, what will happen to your partial pressure of oxygen? Then coming to ventilation defects. So now imagine this 159 is normal. So no problem in the atmosphere. You are not at a high altitude or you are not caught in any closed space. This is coming normally. But there is some problem with the alveoli. So what happens if there is some problem in the alveoli? That alveoli may not be getting ventilation properly. So the alveoli, all alveoli should be ventilated properly. For example, I will tell you take a condition called emphysema. So what happens in emphysema? So in emphysema, what happens? The alveoli surface area is decreased. For example, you take this is a normal alveoli. For understand, this is the normal alveoli. And in case of emphysema, what happens? The alveolar surface area is decreased. So what happens? That alveoli may not be ventilated properly. So whenever there is a decrease in ventilation, so one of the condition in decreased ventilation we can understand emphysema, and another is pulmonary edema, pneumothorax. For pneumothorax, I hope you can understand. So this is the lung. Pneumothorax means instead of lung fluid, alveolar fluid, you are having more air. So pneumothorax, the lungs are enlarged and is filled with more air than expected. So what will happen to the pneumothorax? The lungs are enlarged, excess air than expected. So that will push this alveoli. Imagine this is the alveoli, this is the space is there, but this space is full of air, excess air, increased air, that is pneumothorax. So what will happen? This will compress the alveoli. So what happens to this alveoli? There is a possibility that this alveoli will be damaged and it may not do the proper, it will not be properly ventilated. So that is also a ventilation defect. So pneumothorax, you can understand that. Then diffusion defects. So diffusion defects is the barometric pressure is normal, the oxygen entering into the alveoli is normal, but this is diffusion. Yeah, from the alveoli, the oxygen has to enter into the flowing blood. This is pulmonary arterial end. This is pulmonary venous end. The oxygen into the flowing blood so that the blood gets oxygenated. This is diffusion. This is called diffusion. But imagine, yeah, emphysema also we can take. In emphysema will come here also. So in emphysema, what happens? There may be thickness. So imagine this alveoli is thickened. This alveoli is normal. So imagine in emphysema, the alveoli gets thickened. So what will happen to this downward arrow? Or what will happen to the surface area? You think yourself. This alveoli is emphysematous. Or in emphysema condition, this alveoli gets thickened. The surface area is decreased. So when the surface area is decreased, obviously the transfer from the alveoli to the blood will be decreased. Again, there is a possibility of decreased partial pressure of oxygen because the oxygen is not entering into the blood. Adequate oxygen is not entering. So the arterial pressure, this is the PaO2. As the adequate oxygen is not coming, decreased oxygen because of this block. Imagine this is blocked, so proper oxygen is not entering. As the oxygen is decreased, this oxygen is also decreased. The 95 will be less, either 80 or whatever it is. So the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. That is why it is called hypoxic hypoxemia. So again repeat, hypoxic hypoxia is decrease in partial pressure of oxygen. The common condition is decreased barometric pressure. The overall pressure itself is decreased, which is in high altitude. So as you go higher and higher, the total pressure decreases. Obviously, oxygen pressure, which is 20% of the total pressure, that is also decreased. Closed space. There is possibility of decrease in arterial pressure of oxygen. Ventilation defects. So ventilation defects is alveoli is not able to get the enough. This arrow mark will be decreased. So listen here. This is decreased ventilation, and this arrow is decreased diffusion. Note it down. So the oxygen entering from the outside into the alveoli. If this is affected, this is decreased ventilation. Alveoli is not properly ventilated. Alveoli is getting ventilation, but it is not entering into the blood, or the blood is not oxygenated. That is diffusion defect. Note it down. So ventilation defect also causes decrease in partial pressure of oxygen. Diffusion defect also causes decrease in partial pressure of oxygen because in both the cases oxygen is decreased. The output which is entering into the blood is going to be decreased. So this PaO2 which is 95 is decreased. Here the problem. So this is diffusion defect, this is ventilation defect. Here also partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. Here also partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. So we can make it simple. So V by Q is nothing but ventilation perfusion ratio. So what happens in V by Q defect is, for example, imagine this alveoli is well ventilated, so 104. This alveoli may not be well ventilated, it may be 90 something, decreased, because this this alveoli is well ventilated, this alveoli ventilation is decreased. So what happens? There is a mismatch. So from here, this oxygen, enough oxygen is going from here to this blood, but here it is less. So there is a mismatch. This is called shunting. Shunting of blood. So shunting of blood means blood is there, no problem in blood flow. Remember, shunt means blood flow is normal or more blood flow, but it is not receiving the needed oxygen. So that is called shunted blood flow. So in shunted blood flow is also partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. So it comes under hypoxic hypoxia. Now the final one, right to left shunt. Note it down. In right to left shunt, what happens? The partial pressure of oxygen coming from the atmosphere is normal, 160. The alveoli is normal, it is getting properly ventilated. The alveolar PO2 is 104, normal. The alveoli is, the diffusion is normal, oxygen diffusion is normal. But in the heart, what happens? See here, the right ventricle is carrying deoxygenated blood. Okay, it goes to the lungs for purification. After the purification from the lungs, the oxygenated blood, see here, the oxygenated blood comes into the left atrium, then it will come to left ventricle, then aorta, see the aorta. And this oxygenated blood only is going to reach here, see here, oxygen. Oxygen, that is causing the partial pressure of oxygen 95. Are you able to understand? That and all is separate. Why this 104 become 95? We have already discussed in the previous video. Now what happens in right to left shunt? In right to left shunt, this deoxygenated blood, here, this the blue color, see, this deoxygenated blood, instead of going, this is also deoxygenated. So this deoxygenated blood, instead of going for purification, because of the shunt, it is directly entering into the left ventricle. Now you answer, left ventricle is now having more oxygenated or deoxygenated? Yes, deoxygenated blood. So what happens to the deoxygenated blood? See here, aorta. So the deoxygenated blood enters into the aorta, and what happens to the blood? This blue color, deoxygenated blood. So in this case, there will be deoxygenated blood which is coming. So what will happen to this PO2? Decreased. Are you able to understand? So note it down, this right to left shunt is also a condition where the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased, which is called hypoxic hypoxia or hypoxemic hypoxia. So I will quickly tell, in hypoxic hypoxia, the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased, but the blood flow is normal, the tissue is normal, hemoglobin is normal. So everything is normal, but the starting point itself the problem. So the main causes are high altitude, closed space, ventilation defect, diffusion defect, V by Q mismatch, right to left shunt. So all the causes I explained. Now let us go to next. Now second is anemic, note it down, anemic hypoxia. So anemia, as the name suggests, quantitative and qualitative decrease in RBC or hemoglobin. So now listen here. In anemic hypoxia also, the definition, the oxygen delivery to the tissues is decreased, or tissues is not going to take enough oxygen. Tissues, no problem. Blood flow, no problem. The oxygen coming in, no problem. No hypoxic hypoxia. But the problem is in hemoglobin. So see here, yeah. So once oxygen enters, what is expected? See here, oxygen is entering, oxygenated, which is here 104, here 95, accepted. So listen here, the barometric pressure 760, normal. Entering into this 159, oxygen is normal. 104 alveoli, normal. The blood flow is normal. But if hemoglobin is decreased, that is the problem. So now listen here. Now the hemoglobin is decreased here. So what will happen? Oxygen is there, but the carrier molecule, hemoglobin is the one which has to carry the oxygen to the tissues. Here it has to be hemoglobin plus oxygen. Oxygen alone cannot be carried. Hemoglobin plus oxygen. So when hemoglobin is less, what happens? There is decrease in oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Oxygen is there, but hemoglobin is not there. Hemoglobin is less. That is, it is anemia. So what happens? This will be there. So decreased hemoglobin. So decrease in oxygen delivery to tissues. This is called anemic hypoxia. In anemic hypoxia, either there should be decreased RBC count or decreased hemoglobin. So in any cases, the oxygen carrier is getting affected. As I told, anemia is quantitative and qualitative decrease. So here it is quantity. RBC count is decreased, hemoglobin is decreased. Now qualitative. For example, hemoglobin usually carries oxygen only in Fe2 plus form. So we all know hemoglobin is iron containing pigment, and that should be in Fe2 plus form, or only Fe2 plus iron form. The hemoglobin will be able to carry oxygen. Now what I want to tell is methemoglobin. So methemoglobin is the hemoglobin structure which is iron is in Fe3 plus form. So this will not be carried. Hemoglobin plus oxygen or Fe3 plus form will not carry, note it down. So methemoglobin. So if there is, instead of adult hemoglobin which contains 2 alpha chains, 2 beta chains, instead if there is methemoglobin, what happens? It is in Fe3 plus form, the iron containing pigment. Iron is in Fe3 plus form, which will not be binding with oxygen. Only Fe2 plus will carry oxygen. So methemoglobin, this binding will not occur. So hemoglobin will not carry oxygen. So what will happen? The delivery of oxygen to the tissues is decreased, which results in hypoxia. So hypoxia, as I already told, decrease in oxygen utilization of the tissues. Tissues will not be able to take up, or decrease in or deficiency of oxygen uptake by the tissues. The proper definition is deficiency of oxygen uptake by the tissues. Here, the hemoglobin is not carrying the oxygen, so the oxygen is not being taken up to the tissues properly. So this is anemic hypoxia. Apart from that, there is one more condition, anemic hypoxia, carbon monoxide poisoning in anemic. So carbon monoxide poisoning, anemic hypoxia. How? Let us see in detail. So what happens? Hemoglobin has to combine with oxygen. We all say here, hemoglobin has to combine with oxygen. Here it is methemoglobin, but now let us come to carbon monoxide poisoning. What happens? Carbon monoxide is 200 times. So see here, hemoglobin, that side oxygen is there. Yes, hemoglobin can bind both reversible and irreversible with oxygen. Here carbon monoxide, hemoglobin is 200 times more affinity to carbon monoxide. So what will happen? Bind with carbon monoxide. It will not bind with oxygen. Whenever there is more carbon monoxide in the blood, that is carbon monoxide poisoning. Hemoglobin is binding with carbon monoxide. See, Hb plus carbon monoxide. It is not binding with oxygen. So what will happen? Again, this Hb plus oxygen is not occurring. Hb plus oxygen is not occurring. The black one is methemoglobin. Now this blue color is carbon monoxide poisoning. So in carbon monoxide poisoning, that also results in anemic hypoxia. So in anemic hypoxia, 159, the atmospheric partial pressure is normal, alveolar PO2 is normal, arterial PO2 is normal, blood flow is normal, everything is normal, but the carrying capacity is lost. So the hemoglobin is problem. Decreased RBC, decreased hemoglobin, or methemoglobin, or carbon monoxide poisoning. So either quantitative or qualitative decrease in oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Very, very important. Let's move to another type of hypoxia. Third one, stagnant. So we finished hypoxic hypoxia or hypoxemic hypoxia, where the partial pressure of oxygen itself is less. That second type we discussed, anemic hypoxia. Now I am going to the third type of hypoxia, which is stagnant. As the name suggests, stagnant, staying, stasis, remaining at the same, which is decreased blood flow. So here 159, the oxygen coming in is normal, the partial pressure of oxygen is normal, alveolar oxygen pressure is normal, 104, arterial pressure is normal, tissue is normal, everything is normal, hemoglobin is normal, RBC count is normal, but the blood flow, see the direction, it has to come down, all these are normal. Now hemoglobin plus oxygen is normal, I can rub this, hemoglobin plus oxygen is normal. Yeah, now what happens? There is decreased blood flow. So I require the blood now for the oxygen to be taken to the tissues. The blood is the one which is carrying the oxygen along with the hemoglobin. Are you able to understand? So when the blood flow itself is decreased. So the common condition usually we say circulatory shock. Note it down. So circulatory shock. In circulation, what happens? For example, when the heart is not able to pump properly, when the blood pressure is very, very less. So what will happen? That results in shock. Shock means decreased blood flow. So whenever the blood flow is decreased, the downward arrow, this flow reaching the tissue is less. When the blood itself is less, the oxygen also will be less. So it is resulting in stagnant hypoxia. So one reason is circulatory shock, another reason is heart failure. So what happens in heart failure? The heart is the one which is pumping the pure, for example, left ventricle. Left ventricle pumps the oxygenated blood which enters into the aorta. When the pumping capacity is decreased, because heart failure, especially left heart failure, when the left ventricle is not pumping the blood properly, what will happen to this downward arrow? The blood flow is decreased. So decreased blood flow, which is stagnant hypoxia. So one cause is shock, one cause is heart failure, another third cause is local vasoconstriction. So vaso means vessel, constriction means constricting. For example, I have drawn this here. So the blood vessel, blood flow, but what happens? Seen is black color. The blood vessels are constricted. So what happens? The blood is not able to flow here into, I have put here. The blood is not able to flow here, not able to flow here into. The blood can come only through this narrow space. So various reasons are there for this local vasoconstriction. One can be atherosclerosis. So some bad cholesterol deposits. So atherosclerosis. Here the cholesterol deposits, here the cholesterol deposits. So what will happen? Wherever there are deposits in the blood vessel, that blood cannot flow. So the blood is remaining stagnant at that area. That is called stagnant hypoxia. Even plaque deposits, bad cholesterol deposits, or deposits in the blood vessels. So local vasoconstriction also, the diagram is clearly seen. The blood is not able to flow, more blood is remaining here, or stagnant, or stays there. That is stagnant hypoxia. So that is third type of hypoxia. Now coming to the fourth type of hypoxia, histotoxic hypoxia. Here histo means tissue, toxic means poisoning. So we can take an example of cyanide. So when there is cyanide poisoning, what that it inhibits cytochrome oxidase. So I am telling you about histotoxic, tissue toxin. So cyanide is a toxin which inhibits cytochrome oxidase. So when cytochrome oxidase enzyme is inhibited, what happens? The electron transport chain is inhibited or affected. Or within the tissue, all this happens in tissue. How the oxygen is being taken for energy, all these reactions has to occur. Electron transport chain, that is affected. And another reason is diphtheria toxin. Another reason is diphtheria toxin. So diphtheria toxin also inhibits some enzymes and the electron transport chain is affected. So in case of histotoxic hypoxia, partial pressure of oxygen is normal. The atmosphere oxygen is entering into the alveoli is normal. Blood flow is normal. Hemoglobin is normal. Everything is normal. In fact, the blood coming to the tissue is also okay, but the tissue process is affected. Inside the tissue there is some problem. We have inside the tissue either cyanide poisoning or diphtheria toxin or some other cause which is inhibiting the enzymes which is required for the utilization. So oxygen has come to the tissue, but tissues are not able to utilize it. Available is there, but it is not utilizing. That is histotoxic hypoxia. That's why we tell definition hypoxia is decrease in oxygen delivery or uptake to the tissues or tissue utilization. Better word is utilization. Whenever there is decreased utilization of oxygen by tissues, we call as hypoxia. Based upon the causes, we divide into hypoxic hypoxia, anemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, histotoxic hypoxia. I told the causes for all the four. Now we can compare. So far we saw the four types of hypoxia and what are the causes of four types of hypoxia. Now to summarize, I have put it in a tabular column. For example, to make it understand here, partial pressure of oxygen will be reduced in which type of hypoxia? What do you ask? Yeah, it is decreased in hypoxic hypoxia, normal. Because in anemic hypoxia, it is hemoglobin the problem maker, not the oxygen. In stagnant hypoxia, it is blood flow the problem maker, not the partial pressure of oxygen. In histotoxic, within the tissue problem, not the partial pressure of oxygen. Very simple. Oxygen carrying capacity, obviously it is decreased in anemic hypoxia. We can write like this, you will understand. This is hypoxic. Otherwise normal, simple. Now coming to blood flow. So blood flow will be decreased in stagnant hypoxia. Blood flow is normal in other types of hypoxia. See, very simple. It's very simple. Now you have to concentrate a little bit on this. Arteriovenous oxygen difference. So this is artery which is coming to the tissues, and this is vein. So this is vein, venous end, this is artery. So in case of hypoxia, what happens? Partial pressure of oxygen is less. So what will happen to this 95? You pause the video and try to answer. In hypoxia, what happens to this 95? Because this 159 is less. Because oxygen itself is less. Hypoxia. I told various causes. Closed door, high altitude, decreased ventilation, decreased diffusion. So this 104 also will be less. This 95 also will be less. So AV. So what will happen? A will be, instead of 95, it may be 80 or 60. I will keep it as 60. V will be 40, no problem. So partial pressure of vein is 40 millimeter mercury. But this is the problem. Oxygen itself is less. The partial pressure itself is less. So instead of 90 to 60, now calculate 60 minus 40 is 20. But normal is 95 minus 40. So normal AV oxygen difference is 95 minus 40, which would be 55. But since this 95 is reduced, venous end remains same. It's only partial pressure of oxygen in arterial end is decreased in hypoxia. So in hypoxia means hypoxia. I am very specific. Hypoxia. So arteriovenous oxygen difference hypoxia will be decreased. Anemic hypoxia, this 95 is normal, this 40 is normal. Only the problem is hemoglobin. Either the hemoglobin is less or carbon monoxide poisoning or methemoglobin. So I will say in anemic hypoxia, AV oxygen difference is normal. Stagnant hypoxia. So in stagnant hypoxia, what happens? Very important. Yeah, see here. Remember this. In stagnant hypoxia, blood flow is less. So this is normal 95, but this 95 partial pressure of oxygen is not able to come into this place, right? But since the blood flow is very less, tissues may not be able to take the proper oxygen. This venous end, the oxygen is not coming there properly, so it may be reduced to 20. I am telling about stagnant hypoxia. See here, in stagnant hypoxia, the arterial pressure oxygen is in stagnant hypoxia, blood flow is less. See this black color, it is less. So this 95 is normal, but this 95, this oxygen is not being taken up by the tissue. So what will happen here? Instead of 40, there is a decrease. So imagine now listen, very important. So this is for hypoxia. Where I have written AV oxygen difference is decreased. Hypoxia. I put it in black. Yeah. In stagnant hypoxia, what happens? Yeah, this is 95 is correct. So in AV for stagnant, in stagnant hypoxia, arterial is 90, but venous end is decreased because oxygen is not coming from here. Blood flow is decreased. So the oxygen content which is coming is decreased. As this, for example, you see the very narrow space, only less oxygen is going to come. So venous end, dissolved oxygen. The partial pressure is determined by dissolved oxygen. So the dissolved oxygen coming is less. So let it be 20. Now calculate 95 minus 20. Yeah, 95 minus 20, which is 75. So note it down here, it is increased. So AV oxygen difference is decreased in hypoxia because this arterial end itself is decreased. In stagnant hypoxia, it is increased because arterial end is normal, venous end is decreased. Simple. There it is, arterial end is normal, venous end is decreased. Here arterial end is decreased, venous end is normal. Simple. Yeah. Now coming to histotoxic hypoxia. So what will happen to AV oxygen difference? Venous oxygen difference in histotoxic hypoxia. You can pause the video and try to answer. I will give the choice. AV oxygen difference is increased, decreased, normal. So what happens here is, remember, tissue itself is problem. So cyanide poisoning. So what happens? Tissue is not able to take the oxygen, but oxygen coming is normal. So arterial end 95 is normal, no doubt in that. In histotoxic hypoxia, the tissue is the problem. So this 95 is normal. But what will happen to the output from the tissue? This 20. Tissue is not at all taking the oxygen, not replacing the oxygen at all. So what will happen? This also may be 95. Maybe. So listen here. Venous end. So I have to draw here. So this is histotoxic. This is stagnant hypoxia. So in histotoxic hypoxia, arterial end is 95. But venous end, instead of what, this is histotoxic hypoxia, this is stagnant hypoxia. I again repeat. In stagnant hypoxia, blood flow is less here. blood flow is less. So the oxygen coming out is going to be less. So dissolved oxygen is less. So the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. So this difference is increased. This is stagnant hypoxia. Okay. In histotoxic hypoxia, tissues is not taking the oxygen. Hypoxia, tissues are not utilizing the oxygen. So what happens? That all the oxygen tissues are not taking because cyanide is inhibiting the electron transport chain, or diphtheria is toxin is inhibiting the electron transport chain. So that oxygen is coming as such. So whatever oxygen was here is coming. So 95, 95, it can be 0 also. So AV oxygen is decreased or even 0. AV oxygen difference. AV oxygen difference is 0. The reason is tissue is simple. Tissue is not taking oxygen. So whatever oxygen is coming to the tissues is not utilizing. It is coming to the vein. So 95, 95. 95 minus 95 is 0. Very simple. So this is very difficult. So try to understand this. Now coming to oxygen therapy. This is little bit easy. Definitely useful. Very, very useful. So oxygen therapy is very useful in hypoxic hypoxia. In anemic hypoxia, two causes are there. One, in decreased hemoglobin, not useful, because even if I am going to give oxygen from outside, hemoglobin has to take that oxygen. Already hemoglobin is less there. So what? So not very useful. In carbon monoxide poisoning, I already told hemoglobin, oxygen. So hemoglobin is more bonding towards this, not bonding towards oxygen. Hemoglobin is 200 times more affinity for carbon monoxide. But when I am going to give more oxygen, see here I am giving more oxygen. So what happens? I am trying to take some hemoglobin. So it can be useful. Not very useful like hypoxic hypoxia, but can be useful, not at all. In anemic hypoxia, if there is decreased RBC or decreased hemoglobin, oxygen therapy is not going to that be useful, because hemoglobin itself is less. Even though I give oxygen, it is not being taken by hemoglobin because it is less. In case of carbon monoxide poisoning, remember, hemoglobin is there, but competition. Oxygen is not so much powerful to bind with hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide is binding. So what I do, I am giving more oxygen, oxygen therapy. So when I give more oxygen, I try to take some hemoglobin from the carbon monoxide. There is a fight. There is a fight between carbon monoxide and oxygen. So can be useful. In stagnant hypoxia, not useful. Because in stagnant hypoxia, it is blood flow, the problem, not oxygen. Partial pressure of oxygen is normal, hemoglobin is normal, hemoglobin oxygen combination is normal, but blood flow is less. I have to correct that. I have to correct this block, this atherosclerosis, or I have to correct the shock, I have to increase the blood pressure, all those things are there. Oxygen therapy will not be that much useful. In histotoxic hypoxia, not at all useful. Because in histotoxic hypoxia, everything is normal. See here. In histotoxic hypoxia, partial pressure of oxygen is normal, oxygen carrying capacity is normal, blood flow is normal. Everything is normal. Only tissues not taking the oxygen. Then what use I give the oxygen? I have to correct that problem. Either cyanide poisoning or diphtheria toxin poisoning, or whatever is causing the electron transport chain to be decreased. I have to correct that biochemical sequence. I have to correct that. Not enough by giving oxygen. So oxygen therapy is not at all useful in histotoxic hypoxia. In today's class, I discussed what is hypoxia and various types of hypoxia. Hypoxic hypoxia, anemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, histotoxic hypoxia. So 4 types of hypoxia discussed based upon the causes. And then I put a tabular column like each hypoxia what happens. So which I already told, but the summary. So with this, I will conclude today's class. In next class, we will discuss upon high altitude physiology. So we discuss as you go higher and higher, partial pressure of oxygen decreases. What happens in that high altitude? That I will be discussing in next class. So thank you for watching this video. I will keep you updated.